Welcome to Golden Gate Sounds. Let us pick up from where we left. If you did not watch part 1 and 2, I urge you to do so. The word ordinances in Colossians 2:14 and Ephesians 2:15 does not specifically refer to God's laws. It is derived from the Greek term dogma, which generally refers to opinions, judgments, or decrees. These ordinances could be governmental decrees or religious rulings. It's important to treat these verses separately since they address distinct issues. Colossians 2:14 should be understood in its immediate context, particularly with the preceding verse. And you, being dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he has made alive together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses, having wiped out the handwriting of requirements that was against us, which was contrary to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. Verses 13 to 14. In the New King James Version, dogma is translated as requirements, a valid translation. The phrase handwriting of requirements calls for explanation. Its fundamental meaning is a written statement of obligation, akin to a citation listing the laws someone has broken. It is essentially a record of guilt. This is confirmed by the previous clause, having forgiven you all trespasses. Paul is telling the Colossians that Christ's sacrifice has wiped out the record of their guilt in violating God's law, which is great news. Christ came to bear the penalty for all our sins. By accepting his sacrifice, we are released from the penalty of death caused by sin, and our conscience is cleansed from guilt. Ephesians 1:7, Hebrews 9:14, 1 John 1:7, 2:2. God promises that when he forgives, he removes our sins as far as the east is from the west. Psalm 103:12. This is truly taking it out of the way. Ephesians 2:15 uses dogma differently, and we need to view Paul's argument in context. For he himself is our peace, who has made both Jew and Gentile one, and has broken down the middle wall of separation between us, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is, the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace, and that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross, putting to death the enmity. Verses 14 to 16. Paul identifies the law of commandments contained in ordinances as the enmity. Verses 15 to 16, between Jews and Gentiles, or the middle wall of separation. Verse 14, since this law causes hatred and division, it cannot refer to God's law, which Paul describes as holy, just, and good. Romans 7:12. We can clarify this by recalling Jesus' words to the Pharisees. Why do you also transgress the commandment of God? Because of your tradition. Thus you have made the commandment of God of no effect by your tradition. Hypocrites. Well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Matthew 15:3-9. These commandments of men were the burdensome traditions imposed by the Pharisees, which weighed down the Jews and even Gentiles who wished to worship God. These human ordinances, added by men to God's law, fostered prejudice and separation between Jews and Gentiles entering the church. These ordinances acted as a middle wall of separation. Yet through his supreme sacrifice, Jesus tore down that barrier, for he himself is our peace. Ephesians 2:14. In Paul's time, some new Christians still struggled with the traditions they had left behind. Even Peter, a mature apostle, had moments of difficulty in this area. Galatians 2:11-12. Paul explains to the Ephesians, largely Gentiles, that Christians form a new community that is not bound by the human rules and practices of their previous faiths, but is instead built solely on God's revealed truths. Now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. Ephesians 2:19-20. Christ dismantled the Talmudic traditions, these man-made laws, which were a yoke of bondage, Galatians 5:1. Matthew 23:4, but did not abolish God's law. In fact, he made it possible for both Jew and Gentile to become spiritual Israelites, God's children, Galatians 3:26-29, 6 and 16, so that they may live together freely under his perfect law, James 1:25. As Jesus said, "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Matthew 5:17. Yes, he came to fulfill, to live, to observe, to uphold, and in doing so, he set the perfect example for us to follow. We are called to walk just as he walked, 1 John 2:6. Peter also writes that Christ left us an example that you should follow his steps, 1 Peter 2:21. Paul further urges us, "Imitate me, just as I also imitate Christ," 1 Corinthians 11:1. God's law is good and given for our benefit. You shall therefore keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command you today, that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which the Lord your God is giving you for all time. Deuteronomy 4:40. While Christ indeed eliminated the unnecessary and burdensome requirements of men, God's law remains binding on us. We are called to keep it, not just in letter, but in spirit as well. The benefits of observing God's laws are many and profound, and as Jesus said, "If you know these things, happy are you if you do them." John 13:17. Thank you for watching.